Imagine it is just a random Tuesday morning. You are pouring your very first cup of coffee, looking at the dashboards, and, everything seems completely quiet.
Right, the dream scenario.
Exactly. Your primary servers haven't been breached. Your firewalls are holding strong. Nobody in accounting clicked on a malicious phishing link.
Yeah.
But somewhere out there, a tiny piece of open source code, maybe originally written by a volunteer in Nebraska like 3 years ago, just got hijacked.
And that code is probably buried, 4 layers deep in a vendor's software stack?
Yeah, like in the software you use to process payroll. And if this was, say, 2019, that was just an IT headache. I mean, you might find out about it 3 months later, you patch it over a weekend, and you just move on.
Right, because the mantra back then was universal. It was all about move fast and break things.
Exactly. You capture the market, you push the code. And if a third-party dependency exposes a little data along the way, well, that was just, the accepted cost of doing business.
Yeah.
But, and this is why we're here today, here we are in 2026.
Yeah, and the world has fundamentally shifted.
It really has. In this new era, under the regulatory frameworks we're unpacking today, that hijacked code in Nebraska is no longer just an IT headache. It is an immediate existential legal crisis.
It is. The new standard isn't about moving fast anymore. It is about proving with exhaustive cryptographic documented certainty that you absolutely will not break.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are taking a massive stack of compliance, cybersecurity, and regulatory sources, white papers, legal texts, industry analyses. We're just tearing them down to the studs.
Because we really need to understand these two gigantic European frameworks that are sending shockwaves everywhere. I mean, all across the global economy.
Right. DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act,
Yeah.
NIS2. And look, if you're sitting in an office in Chicago or Austin or Tokyo right now and you think, well, I'm not based in the EU, so I don't care, you really need to lean in.
Yeah, you absolutely do.
Because the extraterritorial reach of these rules means that if you so much as sell a piece of analytic software to a European bank, you were already caught in this web.
That is the most crucial point to internalize immediately, I think. Because these frameworks, they're engineered with a deliberate ripple effect.
Right.
They don't just regulate the entities operating strictly inside the borders of the European Union. They regulate the entire sprawling global supply chain that those European entities rely on.
Which is massive.
Exactly. And, while the word compliance usually conjures up images of dusty binders or endless checkbox exercises, the material we're dissecting today is fundamentally different.
Yeah, it really doesn't read like bureaucratic red tape.
No, it reads much more like a concrete, highly detailed blueprint for surviving modern cyber warfare.
A blueprint for survival. I really like that framing.
Yeah.
Because it is about survival at a systemic level.
Yeah.
And before we unroll that blueprint and start looking at the structural load-bearing walls, I want to give a huge thank you to www.compliancehub.wiki and CISOmarketplace.com for bringing this deep dive to you.
Essential resources, honestly.
Absolutely. As we get into the weeds of these regulations, you're going to realize very quickly that managing this level of risk requires the right tools. Doing this manually is just, it's no longer an option. So www.compliancehub.wiki and CISOmarketplace.com are exactly where you want to start building your tech stack.
For sure.
All right, let's get into the architecture of this thing. Let's look at the twin titans of regulation in the EU right now. DORA versus NIS2.
Right, the big two.
Yeah. Looking at the ISACO white paper and the regulatory text, on the surface, they sound like they're trying to achieve the exact same goal, right? Hardening digital defenses. So why do we have two separate frameworks?
Well, there is a significant amount of overlap in their ultimate intent, sure. But their legal structures, their target audiences, and really the blunt force of their mandates are fundamentally different.
Okay, so let's start with NIS2.
Yeah, so the first most vital distinction to understand is that NIS2 is a directive.
Okay, let's unpack the EU terminology there. Because to a normal person, a rule is a rule. What is the functional difference between a directive and a regulation when it actually hits the desk of a corporate legal team?
Right. So a directive sets out a legally binding goal that all EU member states must achieve. But it leaves the exact mechanism of achieving that goal up to the individual countries.
Oh, I see.
It requires what they call transposition into national law. So Germany takes the NIS2 directive and writes their own specific German law to meet its standards. France does the same. Italy does the same.
Wow. which immediately sounds like a nightmare for any multinational company.
It is.
Because if you operate across Europe, you don't just have one NIS2 standard to comply with, right?
Yeah.
You suddenly have to navigate, 27 slightly different interpretations of what secure actually means.
Exactly. It creates a very fragmented landscape, and the scope of NIS2 is incredibly broad. It applies to entities the EU categorizes as essential and important.
What actually falls under that essential umbrella in the eyes of the directive?
Basically, it covers the foundational plumbing of a modern society. Energy production and distribution, water treatment, transport networks, postal services, public administration.
Healthcare systems, right?
Yes, healthcare systems, waste management. And it also pulls in critical digital infrastructure. Think major cloud computing platforms, DNS service providers, search engines. If society stops functioning properly when a service goes down, it's probably covered by NIS2.
Okay, so NIS2 casts this massive continent-wide net over both physical and digital infrastructure. So where does DORA come in? And why does the EU feel the need to carve out a separate set of rules? Like, if a bank is critical infrastructure, why isn't it just handled under NIS2?
That gets to the second major distinction. DORA is not a directive, it is a regulation.
Meaning what exactly?
In the EU legal system, a regulation is immediately binding and prescriptive in its entirety across all member states at the exact same time.
So no transposition phase.
None. There are no national interpretations. It is a single, unified, ironclad rulebook that applies directly from Lisbon to Helsinki. And DORA is aimed specifically and almost exclusively at the financial sector.
Okay, but when we say financial sector, we aren't just talking about the massive global banks, right? What is the actual scope here?
Oh, it's sweeping. Yes, traditional credit institutions and massive banks, obviously, but also payment institutions, electronic money institutions, investment firms, insurance companies, rating agencies, statutory auditors.
That's a lot.
It is, and
Yeah.
this is a massive one crypto asset service providers.
What crypto?
Yeah. If a crypto exchange or wallet provider is authorized under MiCA the markets in crypto assets regulation, they are fully caught by DORA.
Okay, let's pause on MiCA for a second just to clarify the acronym SOUP. For anyone not tracking the crypto space closely, MiCA is the EU's bespoke regulatory framework specifically for crypto assets, right? Designed to basically bring the Wild West of digital currencies under a traditional regulatory umbrella.
Right, exactly.
So basically, if you are a crypto firm trying to operate legitimately in Europe, you have to comply with MiCA. And the moment you do that, DORA automatically triggers and demands you prove your cyber resilience.
That's a perfect summary, yeah. And the reason the EU carved out the financial sector for this stricter immediate regulation comes down to this terrifying concept of systemic contagion.
Systemic contagion.
Yeah, like if a cyber incident takes down a municipal water supply in a town in Spain, it is a local tragedy. It's a massive operational crisis. But it probably doesn't cross the border into France. The blast radius is relatively contained.
Right, but the financial system doesn't have borders in the same way.
Exactly. The financial system is the central nervous system of the global economy. It is hyper-connected at millisecond speeds.
So if one part goes down,
Everything feels it. If a major clearinghouse in Frankfurt or a critical payment routing network in Paris goes dark due to, say, a sophisticated ransomware attack, the cascading effects hit London, New York, Tokyo, and Singapore instantly. Counterparties fail to settle, like liquidity dries up, panic sets in. The EU recognized that they just could not afford the fragmentation that comes with a directive for this specific sector.
right, they couldn't have 27 different flavors of financial cyber resilience.
Exactly. The stakes were simply too high to let national regulators debate the nuances.
So if I'm trying to visualize the operational reality of this, tell me if this analogy holds up.
Right.
If I am building a house in a newly developed neighborhood, NIS2 is essentially the local municipal building code.
Okay, yeah.
It mandates that the house must be structurally sound, it has to have fire exits, it needs working smoke detectors. But it largely leaves it up to the local municipal inspector to interpret how strictly to enforce those rules on my specific street. DORA, on the other hand,
Yeah.
is like a master structural engineer handing me an exhaustive step-by-step blueprint. It doesn't just say the house must be safe. It dictates the exact grade of titanium I have to use for the foundation, the precise millimeter thickness of the load-bearing walls, and it mandates that I run a live fire drill every single month to prove the fire alarms work under actual heat.
That analogy tracks perfectly with the operational reality. DORA leaves virtually zero room for interpretation. It forces an exact structural standardization.
Right.
And, to push your blueprint analogy a step further, DORA doesn't just dictate what materials you use to build the house. It
Yeah.
dictates exactly how you must interrogate, audit, and manage the third-party suppliers who sell you those materials.
It brings us right back to why a developer or a CISO in Silicon Valley needs to be paying close attention. Because if you are a SaaS startup offering like a really sleek specialized analytics tool or a vendor selling HR software, and your client is a European bank or a crypto exchange.
You are the supplier providing the materials for that house.
Exactly. You are caught in the blast radius of DORA through its third-party risk requirements.
Right.
The regulation legally mandates that your European client force these strict requirements down your throat.
And that extraterritoriality isn't an accidental loophole. It is a highly intentional feature.
Really? They planned it that way.
Absolutely. The EU is effectively weaponizing the massive purchasing power of its financial sector to force global technology vendors to upgrade their baseline security standards. If you want European banking revenue, you play by DORA's rules.
Okay, so we understand the broad, fragmented net of NIS2 versus the surgical, uncompromising precision of DORA. Let's start breaking down DORA's specific architecture. Our source materials generally divide DORA into 5 core pillars.
Right, the 5 pillars.
But I don't just want to list them off. I really want to understand how they actually lock together to stop modern attacks. So let's look at the threat landscape first, because reading the Cloudsmith analysis in our source stack paints a genuinely terrifying picture of what's happening in the wild right now.
The Cloudsmith analysis is essential reading because it provides the why. DORA isn't aggressive just to justify the existence of regulators. It's aggressive because the nature of the adversary has mutated.
How so?
Well, we're no longer primarily dealing with lone wolf hackers trying to brute force a server password or sending a generic phishing email to a junior bank teller. We are dealing with highly sophisticated, often state-sponsored software supply chain attacks.
Okay, let's dissect one of the specific attacks mentioned in the source material, because I think the mechanics of this are crucial to understanding the regulation. Talk to me about the async API attack. How does an attack like that actually work, step by step?
Yeah, so the async API NPM attack from this past July is a textbook example of modern supply chain vulnerability.
Right.
Let's break down the environment first. Modern software is rarely written entirely from scratch. Developers use package managers like NPM for JavaScript to pull in pre-written open-source building blocks of code. We call these dependencies.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you code.
Exactly. It saves thousands of hours of development time. And Async API is a very popular, trusted open-source initiative that provides tools for building event-driven architectures.
So thousands of companies, including banks, likely use their tools to speed up development.
Precisely. Now, in this attack, the adversaries didn't try to hack the banks directly. That's way too hard. Banks have massive firewalls. Instead, the attackers managed to hijack Async API's own internal CI/CD pipeline.
Okay, the continuous integration and continuous deployment system. Basically, the automated machinery that takes the code the developers write, packages it up, and publishes it out to the world.
Yes, the publishing engine itself was compromised, and the attackers used this hijacked pipeline to publish 4 Trojanized NPM packages.
Oh, wow.
And here is the truly insidious part. Because these malicious packages were published directly through Async API's automated systems, they were published under Async API's officially trusted namespace.
So to any automated security scanner or any developer looking at it, this didn't look like some sketchy package uploaded by a random user named Hacker99.
No, not at all.
It'll look like an official, cryptographically signed update from a highly trusted source.
Exactly. Conventional perimeter defenses did absolutely nothing. There was no bad reputation flag to trigger an alert. The banks and enterprise companies essentially opened the front door and invited the malicious code inside because it carried a forged VIP pass.
That is terrifying.
It is. And before anyone in the community realized what was happening, these Trojanized packages had reached 2.9 million weekly downloads.
2.9 million. That means millions of applications pulled this malicious code directly into their own internal build environments, completely bypassing their firewalls.
Yeah.
The Cloudsmith source also brings up the Mastra NPM attack, which used a slightly different vector, right?
Yes, the Mastra attack relied on a combination of typo-squatting and compromised contributor credentials.
Typo-squatting, that's when they misspell a popular name on purpose.
Exactly. An attacker registers a package name that is a very slight easily overlooked misspelling of an incredibly popular package. If you type too fast, you download the malware.
Ugh, such a simple trick.
Right, but they combined this by stealing the actual login credentials of legitimate contributors to the master project. This gave them the access to push 144 malicious packages that garnered nearly 1 million weekly downloads.
Unbelievable.
And the malware hidden inside wasn't designed to immediately crash the system. It was highly evasive. It was designed to quietly siphon off environment variables, API keys, and internal credentials from the machines of any developer who accidentally downloaded it.
Okay, here's where I have to play devil's advocate and push back a little bit.
Go for it.
I hear the mechanics of these attacks, and it is terrifying. The blast radius is enormous. But we are talking about a regulatory framework here. Is a massive PDF of legal text written in Brussels actually going to stop a highly sophisticated, cryptographically disguised supply chain attack like the async API one? Or is DORA just going to force CISOs to generate a mountain of paperwork explaining why they got breached?
That is a very fair question.
Right. Because if the code comes from a trusted namespace, how does a law stop a developer from typing npm install?
That is the exact friction point the industry is arguing over right now. And it's where we have to look at Pillar 1 of DORA, risk management, and Pillar 4, third-party risk management.
Okay.
DORA does not just mandate paperwork. It mandates a fundamental architectural shift. The paperwork is merely the evidentiary exhaust of the technical reality.
I love that phrase, evidentiary exhaust.
Yeah. Under DORA, a financial entity is legally required to implement a documented ICT risk management framework that features continuous monitoring and, crucially, what we call automated policy gates.
Okay, let's drill into that. What exactly is an automated policy gate in this context, and how does it stop the async API attack?
Under DORA's mandates for managing third-party ICT asset risk, a bank can no longer treat third-party open-source code as a trusted black box. They cannot assume that just because code comes from NPM or even a trusted namespace that it is inherently safe.
They have to verify it.
Yes, they are required to build technical controls directly into their software development lifecycle. An automated policy gate is a configurable, software-defined checkpoint. As the Cloudsmith source details, achieving DORA compliance means setting strict quarantine rules.
So mechanically, when a developer tries to pull in that Trojanized async API package, what actually happens?
The request hits the policy gate before it ever reaches the developer's laptop or the bank's internal network. The gate automatically inspects the package.
What's it looking for?
It looks at the cryptographic provenance. Can it mathematically prove exactly who wrote this code and where it came from? It looks for anomalous behavioral patterns, like does this new version of a simple formatting tool suddenly contain code that tries to open a network connection to a server in Russia?
Oh, I see.
Right. And if the package fails these automated checks, the policy gate forcefully blocks the download. It quarantines the package. It removes the human element of a developer making a split-second mistake.
So DORA is essentially outlawing the old model of reactive security, where you let the code in, wait for your antivirus to scream, and try to clean up the mess.
Exact.
It mandates a proactive zero-trust architecture where you have to systematically prove the safety of every single line of code before it crosses your threshold.
Yes. It forces software provenance tracking to become a mandatory operational reality. You have to enforce strict governance over the entire supply chain, and if you don't have these automated gates in place, you are in violation of Pillar 1, and the regulators can penalize you before an attack ever even happens.
That makes the intent of the regulation much clearer. It's not just a checklist. It's a mandate to build a fundamentally different kind of defense. And look, if you are trying to figure out how to architect those specific automated policy gates without bringing your entire engineering team to a grinding halt, I highly recommend checking out the vendor solutions and integration guides available through www.compliancehub.wiki and systemarketplace.com.
Yeah, you don't want to build that from scratch.
Absolutely not. It is a complex engineering challenge, and you need the right tools. All right, so we've talked about putting up the gates to stop the malicious code. But DORA also mandates that you have a perfect map of where all your code and services are coming from in the first place.
Right, the mapping.
Which leads us to the most daunting, operationally heavy requirement mentioned in all of our source material, the Register of Information, or the ROI, under DORA Article 28.3.
The Register of Information is widely considered the heaviest initial lift for the industry. The hard deadline for the first submission is April 30, 2025, and panic is definitely starting to set in.
Let's dissect the mechanics of this. What exactly is a financial entity being asked to map? Because it's not just a list of your vendors, right?
Far from it. At its core, the ROI requires financial entities to map their entire ICT supply chain. You must document every single contractual arrangement for the use of ICT services. But the true nightmare lies in the mandate to map the sub-outsourcing chain.
Sub-outsourcing. Okay, let's ground this in a real-world scenario. Let's say I'm a mid-sized European investment firm, and I buy a cloud-based portfolio management platform from a vendor. Let's call them Vendor A.
Yes, Vendor A is your direct ICT third-party service provider. Under normal vendor management, you assess them, you sign a contract, you put them on a spreadsheet.
Simple enough.
But a Vendor A doesn't build their own physical servers. They host their entire platform on AWS. And maybe Vendor A uses a specialized, highly secure authentication service provided by Vendor B to handle the login process.
Oh boy.
Under DORA, you, the investment firm, are legally responsible for identifying those subcontractors, Vendor B, AWS, the fourth parties, and sometimes even the fifth parties.
Wait, really?
Yes, if they are part of the delivery chain that supports what DORA calls a critical or important function, or a CIF.
That sounds like an infinite regression problem. How do you even begin to track that? I mean, if I buy software from a vendor in Texas, they might consider their own subcontractors to be proprietary trade secrets. How does the EU expect this sprawling, multi-layered web of data to be organized and submitted?
This is where DORA's technical specifications become incredibly rigid and, frankly, quite punishing. The European Banking Authority, the EBA, has published the reporting structure known as EBA Taxonomy 4.0. To identify these entities in your map, you cannot just type Amazon Web Services or Texas Software Inc. into a cell.
What do you have to use?
You must use legal entity identifiers, or LEIs.
The 20-character global ID codes.
Exactly. LEIs were created after the 2008 financial crisis to uniquely identify legally distinct entities involved in financial transactions. DORA is now applying them to tech vendors. Every legal entity and provider in your chain needs one.
But wait, what if that vendor in Texas who provides a critical analytics plugin just refuses to get an LEI? They aren't a bank. They might not care about European financial regulations.
DORA anticipated this friction. If a mid-market provider truly does not have an LEI, the regulation allows the use of a European Unique Identifier, or EUI.
Okay, what is that?
The EUID is a specific string constructed using the ISO country code, followed by a national business registration number, but the formatting is ruthless. If you construct the EUID incorrectly, or if you use an LEI that has lapsed, the regulatory portal will automatically reject your entire Register of Information submission.
Wow. This brings up a massive technical hurdle that multiple sources in our stack, specifically the Jimber and from CISO sources, highlight. Historically, vendor management was done in giant Excel spreadsheets. Risk analysts love Excel. Why is Excel suddenly dead in the water for this specific DORA requirement?
Because the EBA Taxonomy 4.0 isn't just a list of required fields. It includes 116 automated cross-validation checks.
116.
Yep. As the From CISO source explicitly points out, Excel is great at collecting rows of data across different tabs, but it cannot structurally prove that the relationships between those tabs hold together logically.
Give me an example of a logical failure that Excel would miss, but the regulators would catch.
Okay, let's say you list a specific contract in your contracts template, but the unique identifier you assign to the vendor in that contract doesn't perfectly match any identifier listed in your entity template.
Like a typo.
Right. That creates an orphan provider reference. Or, as the fun XP source notes, maybe you format your internal institution code wrong. You use your full internal code, like CBI 00123455, instead of the EBA-mandated C code format, which should just be C12345.
And Excel doesn't care about that.
Right. Excel won't flag that as an error. It's just text to Excel. But the moment you convert that Excel file into the mandated XBRL CSV format and upload it to the regulator's portal, the machine reading system will trigger a fatal error and reject the entire submission.
Okay, wait. XBRL-CSV. Let's clarify that for the audience. I know what a CSV file is. Comma-separated values, basically a raw text spreadsheet. What is the XBRL part, and why does it make this so difficult?
XBRL stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language. It's a standard used globally for reporting business and financial data. The XBRL CSV format combines the structured, machine-readable tagging of XBRL with the lightweight, bulk data handling capabilities of CSV files.
Okay.
It is highly efficient for regulators to parse millions of rows of data across thousands of banks, but it is incredibly unforgiving to generate manually. If a single column is out of order or a data type is wrong, the file is invalid. You cannot manually build an XBRL CSV file that passes 116 cross-validation checks using Excel. You need dedicated software to handle the translation and the referential integrity.
Which leads to a really fascinating trend mentioned in the source material. Companies realize they need dedicated software, but they are terrified of using traditional cloud-based SaaS tools to build this register.
Yeah.
They are actively moving toward browser-only architectures for this task.
Why? What is the CISO's hesitation with putting this data in the cloud? It comes down to basic threat modeling and data sensitivity. Think about what the Register of Information actually is. It is a complete, perfectly mapped blueprint of a financial institution's entire digital nervous system.
That's a good way to put it.
It contains sensitive contract renewal dates, the financial value of services, details on which fourth-party vendors handle the most critical functions, and inherently, a map of the bank's operational vulnerabilities.
It's the ultimate target list.
Exactly. As the VCISO quoted from ISO source highlights, a CISO looks at a cloud-based compliance tool and sees a massive single point of failure. If the compliance vendor gets breached, the hackers now have the blueprints to hundreds of banks.
Oh, wow, that is terrifying.
Therefore, many CISOs simply will not authorize uploading this highly sensitive contract data to a third-party server.
So how does a browser-only architecture solve this without sacrificing the computing power needed to run 116 complex validation checks? How does that actually work mechanically?
It leverages the processing power of modern web browsers. In a browser-only architecture, the compliance application loads its logic written in JavaScript or WebAssembly directly into the user's local browser memory.
So it runs on their own machine.
Yes. When the user imports their raw data files, all the processing, the cross-referencing, the execution of the 116 EBA checks, and the final generation of the complex XBRL CSV file happens entirely client-side, on the user's own machine.
That's brilliant.
Not a single byte of sensitive contract data is ever transmitted back to a remote cloud server. The data never leaves the safety of the bank's internal network until the compliance officer takes the final file and manually uploads it to the regulator's secure portal.
That is genuinely fascinating. The severity of the regulation is so extreme that it is dictating the underlying software architecture of the tools used to comply with it.
Right.
CISOs are demanding local processing power because the risk of cloud centralization is too high. Now, once these thousands of financial institutions submit their perfectly formatted XBRL CSV files, all this data flows up to the European supervisory authorities, the ESAs. And the ESAs have already taken the initial mapping data and created something monumental, the list of the 19 untouchables.
Yes, the critical ICT third-party providers, or CTPPs.
Right.
Based on strict criteria like how deeply reliant the financial sector is on them, how difficult it would be to substitute them, and the sheer concentration of risk. The ESAs have officially designated 19 companies as critical.
Let me read a few of these names from the PwC Legal and Regulation-DORA.eu sources, just to ground this in reality for the audience. We are talking about Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft, IBM, SAP, Bloomberg, Oracle, Capgemini, Equinix. These aren't just software vendors. These are the foundational titans of the modern digital economy.
They are the concrete on which the entire financial system is built.
So here's my speculation, and I want you to challenge me if I'm misreading the power dynamics here.
Sure.
If I'm a small EU investment firm, I have to go through the absolute agony of mapping my reliance on AWS. I have to document the contracts, find the LEIs, run the browser-side validations. But AWS is already universally known to be critical. They are on the list of 19. Does DORA actually force big tech to change their behavior? Or does it just force the little guys to generate paperwork documenting how much they desperately rely on big tech? Because historically, a small bank has zero leverage to negotiate security terms with Microsoft. It feels like a massive power imbalance.
Your assessment of the historical power dynamic is completely accurate. Prior to DORA, the imbalance was absolute. A mid-sized European bank could not realistically negotiate bespoke security audits or stringent reporting timelines with AWS or Microsoft. They were presented with standard terms of service, they clicked accept, and they hoped for the best.
Right. You don't negotiate with a water company. You just turn on the tap and hope the water is clean.
Exactly. But Pillar 4 of DORA, and specifically the designation as a CTPP, fundamentally alters that dynamic. By officially labeling these 19 entities as critical, DORA brings them under the direct, aggressive oversight of European regulators.
What does direct oversight actually mean for a trillion-dollar company like Microsoft or Amazon? Do the regulators actually have teeth?
They have significant teeth. Once designated, a CTPP is assigned a lead overseer, one of the three main European supervisory authorities.
Like the EBA.
Yes, the EBA, ESMA, or EIOPA. This lead overseer is granted sweeping powers. They can demand massive amounts of internal documentation regarding the tech giant's security posture. They can conduct extensive, unannounced on-site inspections at the tech company's global premises.
Wow, unannounced.
Yes, they can launch deep dive investigations into how the CTPP manages their own supply chain risks. And most importantly, they can issue binding recommendations on how the CTPP must improve their operational resilience.
And if the CTPP decides to ignore the recommendations, like if AWS says, we're a global company, we're not changing our architecture for a European regulator.
Then, the lead overseer can impose significant periodic penalty payments. We are talking about fines levied daily, calculated as a percentage of the provider's average daily worldwide turnover, until the compliance issue is resolved.
Daily fines based on global turnover.
Yes. These fines can run into the millions of euros per day.
Wow. So DORA is essentially the EU stepping in and saying to big tech, if you want the privilege of providing the foundational infrastructure for our financial system, you no longer answer just to your shareholders. You answer directly to us, and we will inspect your data centers.
Precisely. It levels the playing field. The small investment firm still has to do the hard work of mapping their reliance, but they now have the immense geopolitical and financial weight of the European Union backing them up, ensuring that the underlying infrastructure provider is held to a rigorous, continuously audited standard. The burden of proof shifts upward.
Okay, that context makes the operational pain of building the Register of Information seem far more justified. You aren't just doing paperwork for a filing cabinet. You are feeding data into a systemic oversight machine that holds the tech giant accountable. It's about achieving systemic visibility.
Exactly.
So, we've covered the preventive measures, building the automated policy gates, and the mapping measures, building the ROI. Let's move to the reality of the threat landscape. What happens when the defenses fail? Because they will fail. Let's talk about the ticking clock of incident reporting, which is covered heavily in both NIS2 and DORA.
Incident reporting is where the theoretical framework collides violently with the chaotic reality of a crisis. Let's contrast the two, starting with NIS2, because it introduces a timeline that has many CISOs losing sleep. Under NIS2, if an essential or important entity suffers what is deemed a significant incident, they are bound by a brutal cascading reporting timeline.
Walk me through the exact timeline. When does the clock start ticking?
The clock starts the moment the entity becomes aware of the incident. Within 24 hours of that awareness, they must submit an early warning to their National Computer Security Incident Response Team, the CART, or the competent authority.
24 hours. That is nothing.
Yes. Then, within 72 hours of awareness, they must provide a more detailed incident notification. This requires an initial assessment of the severity, the operational impact, and any indicators of compromise, the technical breadcrumbs left by the attackers that they've discovered.
Right.
Finally, within 1 month, they must submit a comprehensive final report detailing the root cause, the mitigation measures applied, and any cross-border impacts.
Okay, I have to challenge the logic of this. As someone who follows the cybersecurity space, I know that the first 24 hours after a breach are absolute unmitigated chaos.
Total fog of war.
Yes. Most companies don't know exactly what data was stolen or how the attackers got in until weeks or sometimes months later. The initial telemetry is almost always fragmented, wrong, or incomplete. Doesn't mandating a 24-hour reporting rule just guarantee that the regulatory authorities are going to get flooded with inaccurate, panicked, and largely useless information?
Yeah.
How does that help anyone?
Your assessment of the chaos of a breach is entirely correct. The first 24 hours are incredibly confusing, and legal teams usually want to say absolutely nothing until they have the full facts. But you have to understand the philosophical shift behind the 24-hour early warning.
What's the shift?
The EU regulators are not naive. They are not expecting a perfect, forensically sound post-mortem at hour 24.
Then what are they expecting? Why force the CISO and the General Counsel into this high-pressure reporting window?
It is about systemic survival and contagion control. The 24-hour warning is not a detailed police report. It is essentially a flare shot into the dark sky. It's a company telling the CSIRT, we have been hit by something severe, our systems are degraded, and we don't know the full extent yet, but we are under attack.
Oh.
The purpose is purely systemic. It allows the national CSIRT to look at that flare and then look at the broader landscape. If a CSIRT receives a single flare from one logistics company, it's an isolated incident.
Right.
But if they see three different major energy providers and a cloud hosting company all firing off 24-hour early warnings on the same Tuesday morning, the CISO instantly knows a coordinated, sector-wide, or possibly nation-state attack is underway.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, they can then act immediately to warn other entities, distribute threat intelligence, or initiate national defense protocols. It's not about evaluating the victim's competence, it's about protecting the herd through early systemic visibility.
The flare in the sky, I love that analogy. It completely changes the perspective from punishing the victim to warning the neighborhood. Okay, so that's NIS2. How does DORA handle incident reporting under Pillar 3? Does it follow the same logic?
Conceptually, yes, but it is tailored specifically for major ICT-related incidents in the financial sector. DORA requires an initial notification, followed by an intermediate report, or multiple reports if the incident is prolonged and complex, and culminating in a final report.
And the timelines.
The exact hourly deadlines for the initial notification under DORA's regulatory technical standards align very closely with the extreme urgency of NIS2. The emphasis is entirely on immediate notification the moment an incident significantly impacts the financial entity's critical or important functions. The regulators need to know if the central nervous system is under attack.
And just a quick vital reminder for everyone listening, if you're staring down the barrel of a 24-hour regulatory reporting deadline, you cannot manage that workflow with a stopwatch, an Excel tracker, and chaotic email chains while your servers are literally on fire.
No, absolutely not.
You need automated incident response workflows. So check out the tools and integration frameworks available via www.compliancehub.wiki and CISOmarketplace.com. You want the reporting to be as automated as possible so your team can focus on actually fighting the fire.
Definitely.
All right, so we've mapped our vendors, we've built our policy gates, and we understand how fast we have to report if things break. But DORA doesn't just want you to react to incidents on paper, right? It wants you to actively simulate them in reality.
Yes, the testing phase.
Let's talk about Pillar 2, resilience testing, and specifically the requirement that is causing the most anxiety across the sector, TLPT, threat-led penetration testing. Our sources, like the Tiber EU guide from Deep Strike, highlight this as a massive operational hurdle. What makes TLPT fundamentally different from the regular penetration tests banks have been doing for a decade?
A standard penetration test, historically, is a highly scoped, heavily constrained exercise. It is usually limited to a specific new application or a single network segment. And crucially, it is almost always conducted in a sterile staging or development environment, not on the live systems.
Just to be safe.
Right. The goal is simply to find vulnerabilities, list them in a PDF report, hand it to the developers to fix, and check the compliance box. TLPT under DORA is a vastly more intense, adversarial, and realistic exercise.
Break down the differences for me. How intense are we talking?
First, under DORA, financial entities meeting certain criteria must conduct a TLPT every 3 years. Second, it is intelligence-led. This means the testers don't just run generic hacking scripts.
How do they do?
They use current, highly specific, real-world threat intelligence to mimic the exact tactics, techniques, and procedures. The TTPs of advanced threat actors currently known to be targeting the European financial sector. They act like a nation-state. And third, and most critically, the regulation mandates that these simulated attacks must be performed on live production systems.
Okay, let's just pause and appreciate the sheer operational terror of that phrase, live production systems. We're talking about authorizing a team of highly skilled, ethical hackers to launch a sophisticated cyber attack against the actual live servers of a European bank that are currently processing thousands of real financial transactions per second.
Exactly. It is a live-fire exercise in a crowded room.
The risk of accidentally taking the bank offline during the test or corrupting live transaction data has to be astronomical.
Yeah.
Why on earth would the regulators mandate this level of risk? Why isn't a tabletop exercise or a test in a staging environment enough?
Because the regulators realize that a tabletop exercise is essentially just corporate role play. You can have the most beautiful, perfectly documented, elegantly mapped ICT disaster recovery plan in the world. You can have backups that you've tested in a sterile environment, and they work perfectly.
But it's not real.
Exactly. As DORA recognizes, you do not actually know if your detection capabilities, your security operations center, the CISO, your incident response teams, and your recovery protocols actually function until they are tested under the extreme stress of a real-world scenario.
Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Exactly. The regulators are mandating that financial entities take a controlled punch to the face to prove they can stay standing. Think about it. A staging environment doesn't have the complex network traffic, the legacy spaghetti code, or the stressed human analyst that the real production environment has.
That makes sense.
A TLPT proves whether those automated policy gates we discussed earlier actually trigger when a simulated attacker tries to bypass them using novel techniques. It proves whether the blue team, the bank's internal defenders, can actually spot a subtle intrusion amidst the noise of millions of daily transactions. And crucially, it proves whether the business continuity plans can actually spin up secondary systems without dropping critical customer data.
And mechanically, how does a bank even run a test like this without the SOC team overreacting and accidentally shutting down the whole network, thinking it's a real Russian attack?
That requires incredibly tight operational security and a specialized structure. You use a white team.
What's that?
The white team is a very small, highly trusted group of senior executives and risk officers inside the bank who know the test is happening. They define the scope and the safety boundaries, but the blue team, the actual security analysts monitoring the screens, are kept completely in the dark.
Wow. So to them, it's the 100% real.
To them, it is a real attack. The red team, the external attackers, push as hard as they can. If the red team gets too close to causing actual catastrophic damage to a core system, the white team steps in and halts the exercise. The resulting data provides an unflinching, brutally honest assessment of the bank's actual resilience. It is terrifying, yes, but it is the ultimate proof of operational capability.
That is incredibly intense. It's moving from theoretical security to empirical, proven resilience. Which brings us to a very pragmatic question for the CISOs and compliance officers listening right now, who might be staring at this mountain of requirements, the LEIs, the XBRL CSV files, the 24-hour reporting, the live fire TLPTs, and feeling completely overwhelmed.
Which is a very natural reaction.
Right. So let's tackle the mapping myth. If an organization has already spent the last 3 years and millions of dollars getting compliant with a major rigorous framework like ISO 27001 or NIST CSF 2.0, are they in the clear? Can they just map their existing controls over to DORA, hand the spreadsheet to the regulator, and call it a day?
The short answer, which no one wants to hear, is no. They are not automatically compliant.
Ouch.
Yeah. The long answer involves a fascinating strategic debate currently raging within the compliance community, and our sources highlight the two opposing camps perfectly.
Let's explore that conflict. Where are the battle lines drawn between the experts?
On one side, we have sources like the consultancy CESForce, who explicitly publish guidance titled, Why It's Not Possible to Map DORA versus ISO 27001 versus NIST CSF. Their argument is deeply pragmatic and rooted in the specific legal and operational nuances of DORA.
Okay, lay it out for me.
ISO 27001 is a fantastic, globally recognized generic information security standard. It provides principles. It tells you broadly that you need to manage supplier relationships securely, but it doesn't tell you exactly how to format the data proving you did it.
Right. ISO doesn't know what an LEI is.
Exactly. DORA, as we saw with the Register of Information, requires highly specific, legally mandated templates, exact EBA taxonomies, and precise contractual clauses under Article 30 detailing termination rights and audit access.
Which ISO doesn't specifically require.
Right. You cannot magically generate an EBA taxonomy 4.0 compliant XBRL CSV file just because you have a shiny ISO 27001 certificate on your lobby wall. The legal granular requirements of DORA simply do not perfectly align one-to-one with generic framework controls. A control saying, we review vendors annually, fails a DORA audit if it doesn't include the specific sub-outsourcing mapping mandated by Article 28.
Okay, so that's the it's impossible to start from scratch camp. What is the other side of the argument? Because throwing away years of ISO work seems incredibly inefficient.
The other side is represented by sources like Coppola and Clarisec, who build mapping tools and strategic integration guides. They argue that while it's true there is no magic one-to-one legal translation, you absolutely can and should operationalize specific controls within your existing frameworks to generate the exact evidentiary data DORA requires.
Give me a concrete example of how a CISO bridges that gap in practice. How do you use ISO to satisfy DORA?
Let's take ISO 27001, specifically the updated 2022 version, and look at Annex A Control A.5.12, which deals directly with information security in supplier relationships. The Clarisec source points out that if you rigorously operationalize A.5.12 alongside your asset management controls, you are inherently building the data foundation needed for the DORA Register of Information.
So ISO forces you to ask the vendor the right questions.
Yes. ISO requires you to identify the supplier risks, assess their security posture, and document the relationship. DORA requires you to take that exact risk data, attach an LEI to it, map the fourth parties, and output it in a highly specific structural format.
Ah, I see.
The argument from this camp is that the framework provides the powerful engine, even if DORA dictates the exact bizarre shape of the exhaust pipe. You use your mature ISO processes to gather the raw data consistently, and then you use compliance tools to format that data to meet DORA's rigid legal templates.
What about NIST? The Secure Controls Framework source dives deep into NIST CSF 2.0. How does the American framework help a company survive a European regulation?
NIST CSF 2.0 is an exceptional tool for benchmarking and structuring an entire organizational cyber program. It breaks cybersecurity down into 6 core functions: govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover.
Govern being the brand new addition in version 2.0, right?
Right.
Designed to elevate cyber risk in the board level.
Correct. And that govern function perfectly aligns with DORA's incredibly heavy emphasis on the accountability of the management body. DORA explicitly states that the board of directors can be held personally responsible if the ICT risk strategy is flawed. NIST CSF allows an organization to use profiles to define their current state and their target state, and tiers to measure their maturity.
So how does NIST map to the intent DORA requirements like the 24-hour reporting or the TLPT?
Adopting the NIST framework won't automatically write your DORA incident report or format it correctly. But if you have heavily invested in the detect and respond functions of NIST, it ensures that your SOC actually has the technical capabilities, the log aggregation, the behavioral analytics, the incident playbooks built into your organization to make that 24-hour reporting mandate even physically possible.
Right.
If you aren't mature in NIST detect function, you won't even know you've been breached until week 3, meaning you instantly fail DORA's 24-hour rule.
So to synthesize this for everyone listening, navigating this complex web, you cannot take an ISO 27001 audit spreadsheet, cross out ISO, write DORA and marker, and hand it to the European Banking Authority. You will fail the audit.
Spectacularly, yes.
However, frameworks like ISO 27701, NIST CSF, or COVID-19 provide the essential internal vocabulary, the structural operational discipline, and the raw data gathering processes you desperately need. They are the grueling training regimen that builds the muscle. DORA is the actual Olympic event where you have to perform under incredibly specific rules.
That is a highly accurate way to summarize the dynamic. They provide the necessary but not sufficient foundation. You still have to do the highly specific, grueling work of DORA compliance, the LEI mapping, executing the live TLPTs without crashing the bank, updating thousands of legacy contracts to include Article 30 termination rights. But executing that work is infinitely more manageable if your organization already speaks the rigorous language of NIST or ISO.
And if you are currently staring at that gap between your current ISO certification and the impending reality of DORA, and you need to figure out how to operationalize that mapping, again, I strongly encourage you to look at the resources, integration tools, and expert guidance available through www.compliancehub.wiki and CISOmarketplace.com. You need software that understands both languages to build that bridge efficiently.
Yeah, you really do.
This has been an absolutely massive journey today. We have taken you from the broad foundational net of the NIS2 directive, which is scrambling to ensure that critical infrastructure like water and energy across Europe has a survivable baseline of security.
Right, the building codes.
We've traced the logic into the surgical, uncompromising, extraterritorial precision of the DORA regulation. We've explored the sheer operational terror of sophisticated supply chain attacks like async API, where trusted namespaces are weaponized against us, and how DORA's Pillar 1 mandates automated policy gates to cryptographically block those attacks before they enter the build environment.
A huge shift.
We've waded deep into the technical nightmare of the Register of Information, dissecting the EBA Taxonomy 4.0, the 116 automated checks, and why CISOs are demanding client-side, browser-only architectures to protect their sensitive mapping data from the cloud. We've looked at the tipping clock of the 24-hour early warning system, understanding it not as a punitive measure, but as a systemic flare in the sky for herd immunity.
Exactly.
And we visualized the anxiety of running live fire penetration tests on production banking systems to prove that the defenses actually hold up when punched in the face.
It is a phenomenal amount of operational, legal, and technical change being forced upon the global system in a very compressed timeline. The deadlines looming in 2025 and 2026 are not polite suggestions. They are regulatory reality, backed by massive fines and intense scrutiny.
Which is why we want to give one final massive thank you to our sponsors, www.compliancehub.wiki and CISOmarketplace.com, for supporting this level of deep technical analysis. If you need to make sense of this new era of compliance and you need the tools to survive it, start there.
Definitely.
Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to chew on. Throughout this entire deep dive, we've talked about how DORA and NIS2 are fundamentally designed to protect the system. They force extreme transparency, they force mapping, they force you to know exactly who you rely on and exactly how secure they are. But I want to throw it over to you for a final provocative thought. Is there a dark side to all this mandated visibility?
It is perhaps the most chilling, counterintuitive question of this entire regulatory push. And it is something that is not explicitly resolved or even deeply addressed in any of the white papers, legal texts, or vendor guides we've discussed today.
Okay, lay it on us.
By forcing the entire European financial sector, and by extension the global supply chain, to document every single third-party and fourth-party dependency, by building these massive XBRL CSV files detailing exactly which obscure subcontractors hold up critical functions, and by the ESAs officially publishing the list of the 19 most critical ICT providers, has the EU accidentally created the ultimate, perfectly mapped target list for adversarial nation-states.
Oh, man.
We have legally mandated the creation of a centralized map that shows exactly where the global economy is most vulnerable, exactly which single points of failure exist in the sub-outsourcing chain, and exactly how the digital bones of the banking system are connected. The question for 2027 is, who else is looking at that map?
Wow. That is a deeply unsettling thought. You spend billions of dollars and years of effort building the ultimate blueprint for systemic defense, and you might just be handing your most sophisticated enemies the perfect blueprint for an attack.
It's a real risk.
Thank you for that incredibly uplifting final thought to close us out. To you listening, let that sink in. The X-ray machine of regulatory compliance has shown us exactly where the bones are connected. Now we just have to hope the armor holds against the people who know exactly where to strike. Keep digging into these frameworks, keep challenging the assumptions in your own architecture, and keep learning. We'll see you on the next deep dive.